It's really harsh.
It
Very,
is.
very harsh.
She's mean. Okay, so that having been done, I don't think we have any housekeeping stuff going on today. So I sent out the email about the class module. At the very end, I'll talk about the homework, but you guys know where to find the information. So with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're going to talk today about the technology that you as a director need to know. This is not necessarily going to make you a technological whiz by any means, unless you already are, of course. But it'll give you the basics that you need to know about your technology in your library and how to manage it. So we're going to start off with the ILS. ILS stands for Integrated Library System. It is the catalog, essentially, for your library. It does, in business terms, it does customer relationship management, it does inventory management, and several other things that, depending on your particular ILS. So what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about what the ILS is, and then we're going to talk about which ILS you all use and how to find it, how to find your friends. That would be people who use the same ILS as you and who are resources for when you have problems or questions. So, as I said before, the ILS is inventory control for your materials and patrons, if you want to consider them inventory. Customer relationship management for patron information. It is business control software sometimes, acquisitions, inventory. Some people have more of that stuff in their ILS. Some do it in other places, but it can act as business information, acquisitions and budgeting and that kind of thing. So on the forum or on the classroom, there is a forum about your ILS. Go in there, post which one you use. For those of us who are in the NECLS or SECLS or CKLS regions, we all use the Koha ILS. I know North Central uses Versa. So, and then you guys post in the forum about which ILS you use, and then make note of who uses the same ILS, so you know who to call when you have questions. Okay, so quick and dirty. The next thing we're going to talk about is troubleshooting, and this is how to get out of problems in your technology. The steps before you call your technology person. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to figure out what the problems are and how to pass along information, not how to necessarily how to fix it yourself, but how to let your tech person know what's going on. Part of that is being able to identify and locate network resources, because quite often your tech person will be like, tell you to reboot your router or whatever. You need to know what that is. And then know how to contact your ISP, because a lot of times your internet service provider is the problem. You lost internet or whatever. You need to call them and find out what's going on. So troubleshooting in and of itself is just a systematic approach to solving a problem. If you do any reference work, the reference interview as a librarian is very similar to troubleshooting work as a tech. My bachelor's is in information technology, and my master's is in library science. And I noticed right off the bat when we were talking about reference interviews that I had been doing that for the last 17 years, trying to find out what actually is going wrong with the technology, because quite often what people tell me is the end result. It's not the cause of what's happening. So being able to figure out what the actual cause is and then pass that on to your tech person is a huge time saver and a big help. So When you're troubleshooting, Google is your friend. If it's probably what your tech person's going to use, typing in error messages into Google can be incredibly useful. And when you're troubleshooting, you need to be able to locate and identify those network resources. And I talked about that just a minute ago. One of the things we do here in Neckles is our tech folks, Dan and Greg, they go out and they take pictures of your network. And then we have that in a wiki here. So when you call, say, Brandy, because I see your smiling face in front of me here, Brandy calls and says, you know, my computer's not connecting to the wireless. One of the first things we're probably going to do is say, go to this machine. We can tell you which one it is because we have a picture of it, and unplug it, plug it back in. Rebooting is always the first thing tech people tell you to do, right? So knowing how to find those boxes that we ask you to do, that is both our responsibility as the tech people and your responsibility as the library director to be able to find those things. And this is a cartoon from XKCD. I think that's it. Anyway, it's techie based, and this is absolutely true. It's not that we know so much more than you do about computers when we come to fix your stuff. We have a little more experience. So what we do is we go through this flow chart. We just go through it really fast. A lot of times it looks like we just sit down and start to immediately fix the program, but we don't. We're poking around ourselves. We just do it a little bit faster maybe. But basically this flow chart right here is how to become your local computer expert. There is a copy of it on the Moodle page, classroom if you want access to it. So speaking of a Moodle class, there's also a PC troubleshooting cheat sheet on the Moodle class. This is not anything you have to turn in, it's just for you. But if you want to print that out and fill it out, it has the information for your internet service provider, who it is, what their phone number is, various bits of information that they may need. It's a nice cheat sheet for you to have at hand in case your internet goes down. You know who to call and what to tell them when they start asking questions. Most of you in libraries have your ISP bills you each month. You may get E-rate. That's something to look at as well. But most of you have just the same kind of internet service provider that you have at home. CenturyLink, AT&T. We used to have a statewide provider that did education in libraries, but about the time I got here in Neckles 5.5 or so years ago, that was going away. So, so you'll need to know who your internet service provider is, identify that, and then fill out that cheat sheet, and you'll have what you need when things go wrong and the internet goes down. Sorry. Yeah. My mouse isn't wanting to be clicky today, apparently. Okay, so just a real quick overview of some of the things that you may be come into contact with while you're troubleshooting. One of the things is you may be asked to let your tech connect to your computer. Here in Neckles, we use Screen Connect. We used to use LogMeIn. TeamViewer is another option. Other systems use different software, but basically the idea is that the tech person can connect to your computer and control it through a remote connection. And a lot of times that will save time and money, because if you have to wait for us to be able to come down and visit you, sometimes it can take a while. So remote connection is, if you're not familiar with that kind of software, you don't know what you're using, check with your systems tech people to see what they use and how you can access it if you need to. Device lights. This is for the networking stuff that I talked about with the pictures. Another reason to take pictures of your devices is to know what's normal. So when it's not normal, you can tell people. So when you're calling your ISP and they say, are your lights different? What lights are on? You can see what normal is and let them know that maybe something that's usually steady green is now blinking orange. That's usually a bad sign, and usually requires a reboot. But that's another reason to have a picture of your devices, is not only to be able to identify them, but to identify the lights that are on them. This goes for your computers as well. The lights on computers are a little less important than on networking devices, but it's nice to know, if the back is blinking, back of your tower is blinking, it's nice to know that that's not normal. So cables, unplug and then replug cables. I can't tell you how often somebody will call and say the monitor doesn't work, and it ends up being a loose cable connection, and if they had unplugged it and replugged it, it would have fixed it immediately. I do know I was in my previous library, we had two buildings, the admin building and the library. The admin building was across the street, and that's what my office was. And I got a call, somebody's speakers were broken. And so I grabbed an extra set of speakers and I ran across, and I looked, and it was, the cable was, if she looked at it, it was hanging there off. And so I just plugged it back in. I was like, hey, look, I fixed it for you. She thought I was fabulous, and all was great. But that's one of the first things. If something isn't working, try unplugging it, replugging it, rebooting it, then call us. If you're at all worried, most of the time unplugging and replugging is not going to do any damage at all. Computers, modern computers, don't have to go through the shutdown system that a lot of us are familiar with from older computers. If you do have to reboot it without going through the shutdown system, it's not as big a deal. So yeah, just be aware of what cables and what they look like. Remember what it looks like normally, so that you know if something has been unplugged or replugged. And then the Task Manager, CC Cleaner, and Google combination of troubleshooting help. There is on the lesson 2 in Moodle more information about the use of those tools for troubleshooting, and I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail here. But just a quick overview. The Task Manager you get to by Control-Alt-Delete, and that brings up a menu that you can choose Task Manager from. That's how you close. If you have a program that you cannot close out of, that's how you force it to close. CC Cleaner is a computer cleaner that cleans out old files and stuff. If your computer's slowing down, it's a good tool to kind of get your computer back into shape. And then Google, like I said, popping an error message into Google is the best way to figure out what's going on. But you do have to be careful and get the error message exactly. Again, in my previous life as an information technology manager at a public library, I got a phone call that said, my computer is not working. It says blah, blah, blah. Can you fix it? No, I cannot fix it with that kind of information. I need the exact error message. Learning how to take a screenshot is maybe something that might be valuable. So if you don't want to try and jot it down, because sometimes those error messages can be crazy long or just difficult, long numbers and letters and that kind of thing. So having that exact error message can sometimes be a huge time saver. Just please don't ever call your tech people and say that your computer isn't working and it says blah, blah, blah. Can you fix it? Because we're not going to be able to do that. So that is the idea behind the troubleshooting. Just kind of poking around and figuring out, know what things look like when things are working, and be able to communicate with your tech people what is not normal, what things are not looking like they should. So are there any questions before we go to security and policies? Are there any questions about the troubleshooting section? Lots of no's. Okay. Alrighty, well, you can always poke questions in the chat or unmute yourself and interrupt me. But if you put something in the chat, Anna's keeping an eye on that for me, so I will not miss it. One of us will get it. Okay, so security and policies. The troubleshooting stuff is kind of the low level, on the ground thing. Security and policies especially, are your job as the director in conjunction with the board. So it's important that you understand what's going on. So in this section, we're going to talk about security and the software tools that are available. We're going to talk about the best practices for secure passwords and data privacy. We're going to talk about potential security and privacy threats, what kind of things you might see as you go along in your day. We're going to talk about privacy and intellectual property issues. These are things that come up, and honestly, if you do not have a policy dealing with this, you're kind of leaving yourself vulnerable. Having a policy that you can fall back on that iterates exactly what you're doing to protect the privacy of your patrons, of the intellectual property of your materials is a good practice. And then finally, we're going to talk about different kinds of policies for computer, internet, wireless, and technology planning and disaster recovery. Technology planning maybe later, actually. But these kind of policies, we'll talk about them. And there are sample policies around in the Moodle site if you're interested in getting those. So we're going to start off talking about security, the software that you can use to keep yourself secure. Everybody should have a virus protection on your computer. It's probably managed by your system. We provide the ESET virus here in Nichols. Virus protection, not viruses. We try not to give you all viruses. But the ESET virus protection program is what we provide here at Nichols and what we use as a system. Your system may use something different. Be aware of what that is, just so you know. But above and beyond that, because no virus protection is perfect, it's sometimes a good idea to have a secondary software, and that, in this case, Malwarebytes or Spybot Search and Destroy, links should be on the Moodle site, are both good after you've been infected virus finders. So if you get pop-ups, one of the things that a lot of things that slide through virus protection, what they do is they will pop up ads in the middle of your browsing session. So if you get that, Malwarebytes or Spybot Search and Destroy will find them and delete those virus programs that might have slid through. So those are our options. Password protection and a password vault is probably the only way to really manage passwords in this current environment. I firmly believe that we are heading towards biometric passwords of some sort, either retinal scans or something. We'll figure out a way to make us our password. Until then, however, you have probably, if you're normal, 100 passwords that you have to remember between all the stuff that you do at the library and all the stuff that you do at home. Remembering 100 passwords in your head is just not feasible. So you're going to want to find some kind of software or password vault of some kind. Writing them down in a notebook is okay if your notebook is protected in a locked drawer or something along those lines. Did you have a question, Darren? No? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. So what I've got a couple of options here. I think there are a couple more on the Moodle site. The one we use here at the Neckles office is LastPass. And I double checked this before I started. When I first started using LastPass many years ago, it was $11, $12 a year. I think it's up to $24 a year now. That's still pretty reasonable. You can use it for free, and it is totally usable. But if you want to use it on your tablet or your phone, you really need to pay for it. We do pay for it here at Neckles. I think it's $16 per user per year is what we pay. And that gives us the opportunity to share passwords. So if you're ever in the position of, you've got your passwords that get you into your director level ILS or various things, you can share the ability to get into those passwords without actually sharing the passwords with your staff. If something were to happen to you, the way I've always referred to it is it's your if I get hit by a bus issue. If I get hit by a bus, somebody needs to know these big passwords, the passwords for your director level stuff. If you're a big enough library to have an IT staff, your IT staff need to be sharing those passwords with you. And that is either can be done through a shared folder in LastPass, pre-LastPass, because it's been several years since I've been an IT manager, but the way I did it was I kept a spreadsheet that I updated every month, saved to a USB drive, and handed off to my boss. And so my director had a copy of all of the passwords that I had access to. And that kept it. So if I got, like I said, we had the library on one side of the street and the admin building on the other. So I'm crossing the street all the time. If I get hit by a bus, she's able to continue the work of the library without things going to a halt because nobody can get into whatever service it is that they need to get into. So that's kind of a clunky, requires human intervention to keep up, and I never recommend those kind of method. Today, I would say LastPass. So right now, what we do at Neckles is the IT department and I share several folders, the websites and all that, so that we can all get into them. And if I change the password on a website, because we share the folder, it automatically updates on their account. So that's a real benefit for paying $10 per user per year, or $16, I'm sorry, $16 per user per year for LastPass. So this third thing, don't click random links. I don't mean to yell at you, but it is really important that you think before you click. If you're not expecting a link to show up in an email, think about it. One of my best, my favorite stories, when I did a really good job of passing this on, our human resources person at my previous library was not what I would call technologically advanced. She could use a computer, she was fine, but she wasn't real savvy about these things. And she came to my office one day and said, I'm not so sure about this website. And I looked at it, and it was it's an email that said it was from the IRS, and it wanted her to download a form, but the URL for the form ended in .de. Well, that's a country code for Germany. There's no reason for the IRS to be storing their documents in Germany. It just will never, ever happen. So she recognized that .de was not normal, and she didn't know what to do with it. So she came to me and asked about it, which I was just so pleased, because that saved me from having to rescue her computer after she downloaded that virus. So be aware of what is and isn't normal. Again, there is a forum on the site that talks about, I have a sample URL up, and asks you to identify what's wrong with it, essentially. So not clicking on random links. Again, like I said, I don't intend to yell at you here, but I don't want you to get caught. That's one of the things that computer virus protection and server software is now tough enough. People are doing a good enough job of making really difficult to guess passwords, that hacking in through just brute force, throwing everything in the dictionary at a server and hoping that one of the passwords, you get one of the passwords, it doesn't work like it used to. So the way people get in is by social engineering, and that's by sending you an email that you click on, and that we have, we'll download whatever it is virus and get them into your computer in a way that they can't just fire off. Darren mentions that this guy promised him $1 million if he clicked on the link. And what I find funny about that is our ticket software, our ticket email, just got an email from, we were actually promised what? I think it was $13.6 million if we sent them our bank account information. And that was sent to our tech@necklace.org address, which means it made it into our trouble ticket software. So, great fun. One of the things with this $1 million, the $13.6 million that we were offered, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. Nobody is going to email you and say your long lost uncle passed away and you are now eligible for millions of dollars in inheritance if you just give them your bank account number. That's just a big flag, red flag. And then finally, the kind of related to security, copyright and intellectual property issues, understanding those as librarians. One thing we are not is copyright police. So we're not necessarily there to enforce proper copyright usage. But we do have a duty to not help people break copyright and break the law. So there's kind of a fine line there. Copyright is a really complicated subject that can take whole workshops to explain. But as long as you understand that fair use is a thing, fair use is a limited amount of use of copyrighted material for free. So like for a book, 10%-ish is considered fair use. If someone comes in and says, I want to copy off this one chapter of a 20 chapter book, you can probably show them where the copier is and help them without any worries that you're helping them break the law. Somebody coming in and downloading or checking out a bunch of your CDs and then immediately going to your computer and ripping the entire content of all of the CDs to their personal iTunes account is not within copyright. If they want to do that at home and you don't know about it, that's grand. And even if they're doing it and they're not asking you for help, that's a value judgment. But if they ask you for help to do this, it's a good time to say, that's actually not legal, and I can't assist you with this. That's the same thing with intellectual property rights with software and things like that. We need to understand what patrons can and can't do. Fair use will go away if we don't defend it. So, don't be scared to say, I think this is a fair use thing. If someone does want to copy off a chapter of a book, or want a copy of, that happens a lot with ILL. People will request a chapter from a book that instead of just sending the whole book, they just want you to copy a chapter. And again, fair use comes into play as long as you're keeping it 10% or less of the book, that sending it on is fine. So those are the kinds of things to think about there. Kind of backtracking a little to the password issue. This is a description of two different kinds of passwords. The top one is your traditional, substitution, whatever, password. And then the 4-word phrase password. And the 4-word phrase is a lot harder to guess, but easier for you to remember. What we suggest here at Neckles, now that a lot more, used to be you couldn't put spaces in passwords. There were no spaces allowed. However, now that they allow spaces, we suggest sentences with punctuation. A password that I used in the past is my dogs. So Rocky and Apollo were my dogs' names, and I did not name them actually. I'm a Rocky fan, but not that big of a Rocky fan. Rocky and Apollo were my dogs, and I had, and it's been long enough now, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something along the lines of Rocky and Apollo are good dogs. Yes, comma, yes, they are, exclamation point. It's been years since I've used that. Apollo passed away at least a year ago, so it's been several years since I've used that. I still remember it, but that kind of password is super difficult for a computer to guess. As you see there, a much shorter password, correct horse battery staple, would take 550 years for your standard computer to guess those, and it's fairly easy to memorize. Again, sentences are easier to remember for us humans, and they turn out to be really, really hard for computers to guess. So this is another one of those XKCD passwords that we, or comics that I have on the Moodle. Okay, and I talked a lot about the password helpers. I forgot to hit go apparently on this. But these are password helpers. I mentioned those. The 1Password is another one. This is a screenshot from our LastPass Enterprise. So whenever I have a extension in my browser that gives me access to LastPass. And whenever I'm on a site, I can, generally it will come up with hey, you've got a password for this site, you click on it and it autofills it and goes. All I have to remember is the password to LastPass. And that's it. I don't have to remember any of the other 100,000 passwords that I use for all of these different services that I have available to me. So the thing I like about the Chrome or Firefox extension here is that it automatically prompts you to save passwords as you log into things. So as you go along using it, it will become more and more valuable until all of a sudden one day you'll realize that you cannot live without your password manager. The password manager, the single password that you need to remember, this is where you pull out the big sentences with the big punctuation and the really hard to remember stuff. And like I said, this is LastPass. KeePass, I think works fairly similarly. I know 1Password does. These are all options that you can look at and decide for what works for your library and your staff. But they're easy to use and so much more secure than typing things or writing things down in a notepad that you keep in your desk. That's not going to work at all. Unless, of course, like I said, you keep it locked away in a drawer and hard to get to. Okay, so I mentioned the security threats. They're not just technological. That social engineering is an issue. The thing that I've seen, and this happened just very recently with I don't know if you guys saw the thing on Facebook that went around asking what your wedding name would be if you were going to the royal wedding a couple of weekends ago. And it said, you know, your royal wedding name is the first name of your first pet as your first name and the street that you grew up on as your second name. Well, those are common security questions that people use to protect their passwords. If you need to reset your password, it'll ask you a security question. Those are the kinds of things that a lot of websites ask for. And so when I saw that coming through, all I could think of was they're collecting that kind of information on everybody who did this fun game on Facebook. And now if you ever do a security question that is the name of your first pet or the street that you lived on as a kid, that is no longer secure. Somebody can reset your password, get your information, because they now have that information. So it's not just, it used to be, you know, just the emails that you don't click on those links, right? It's now also your social media is a real issue that you have to be aware of what kind of information you're putting out there and what kind of games. A lot of I know most of you probably heard of the Cambridge Analytica use of data from Facebook. A lot of that data that they got, people gave them the permission to mine that data in the course of playing a Facebook game of some sort. So, you know, one of those pub quizzes, which potato are you? Or, you know, one of those things. So, you know, those are all things to think about when you're interacting on your social media. I mentioned the email phishing campaigns where they'll email you and ask you to click on links and make it look like it's coming from your bank or from the IRS or from wherever. And they can be really, really sophisticated looking. So just keeping an eye on things and knowing if your bank emails you and says, go to this website, instead of clicking the link, type the link into your browser. If it's real, then you're fine. If it's not, then you saved yourself a visit from your friendly tech people to clean the virus off your computer. And something that a lot of our patrons deal with, more necessarily than you guys, but something you might want to keep an eye on for your patrons' sake, is scammers, either through the phone or through email or whatever, they prey on the elderly, and they want them to go and either send the money through a website or buy a bunch of Target gift cards. The IRS is never going to ask you to pay your IRS tax bill via Target gift cards. It's just never going to happen. But when these people call and get a hold of these elderly folks, they're so pushy and so rude, quite frankly, that the folks get confused and they go and do it. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on as your patrons come in and use your computers, understanding that these scams happen, and knowing when to step up and say, I'm not 100% sure this is real. Let's take a look at this, is a good thing to do. And as for policies, the first thing is we are in a state that requires filtering. Kansas has a CIPA law, it's Children's Internet Protection Law, and you have to have a policy that provides for some kind of internet protection. Usually filtering is what is used, and it has to be updated or at least reviewed every 3 years. When you go through your state statistics, one of the things that you have to do is certify that you have reviewed your CIPA policy in the last 3 years. That is one of the check boxes there at the very end. So one, that means you need to have one. If you don't, you need to get one. And there are lots and lots of options and examples. Your system consultants can help with that. And then it needs to be part of your regular security or regular policy review. Internet acceptable use policy, including wireless use. Even if they come in with their own devices, if they're using your wireless, you have the right to set up a policy that tells them what kind of content they can access. Computer acceptable use policy is sometimes a good idea, just so that people understand what is and is not acceptable for them to do on your computers. We did have a guy we had to ban for life, actually, several years ago, because he would get on our computers and connect to a forum and make threats against the president. I think at the time it was President Bush the second. But he would, the FBI came and they requested his information from us with a warrant, so we gave it to him. He was using a computer at that time. And when they went after him, we also banned him from the library because that was something that was not, making threats against other people, especially the president. But anybody is not an acceptable use of our computers, and we had that policy. So, and then disaster recovery, that's one of those things that people are always, yes, we really should have a disaster recovery plan, but they don't necessarily always do. So the big thing with disaster recovery, from my perspective, is do you know what you're going to do with your tech? If a fire should come through and burn down your building, how do you recover from that? What do you have backups? Do you have everything stored in the cloud? Did you just lose your entire patron database along with all of your material inventory? Do you have a way of telling your insurance agent how much, how many materials you had and how much they cost and how much they need to write you a check to replace them? Those kind of things are real important when a natural disaster happens. But natural disasters aren't the only kinds of disasters. If your technology fails, if you have if you're one of those folks who hosts your own ILS and your server dies, do you have a backup? Do you have a plan for replacing that information on a different computer? Those are the kinds of things that you need to think about. And again, there are sample disaster or disaster plans and policies in the Moodle site. So be sure to take a look at that. Finally, we're going to talk a little bit about websites and what you should do to keep your website going. So we're going to talk about why you should have one, talk about the cloud service, which some of you use, and alternatives to that if you don't, and knowing how to update the library's website. A lot of that's going to be system by system, but we'll talk about it just a little bit. These are the things that I think are pretty necessary for a library to have. You should have up-to-date information on services that you provide, your phone number, a link to your catalog. Those are the kinds of things that people come to your website to find. We did a survey, again, 100 years ago when I was at a previous library, and out of the 25 people that answered the survey, 19 of them were just going through our website to get to our catalog, which is fine, but that means that the catalog link really needs to be front and center so that they can find it easily. Current schedules. So, if you've got board meetings, various things that go on at your library, having that up to date. It should be reviewed for current info at least once a year. I would recommend maybe twice a year. Just pencil it in to do every 6 months. Board information, that's something you're going to update every year. You should have the names of your board at least. If you don't, the open records requirements means that anybody should be able to request copies of your minutes. If you don't want to post them on the website, it's not necessary, but you should have them available somewhere, either in print in your library or on your website is actually a pretty good idea. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Brandy, I worked with the previous director at Burlingame to do some minutes, past minutes in Google Docs, and they just linked to it from their website. So that's something you can do. And then hours of service and a map. And the state. I had I had a conversation with the Meriden librarian a couple of years ago. She had a Boy Scout troop show up at her library 5 minutes before she was supposed to close. They had an appointment to do crafts with the Meriden, Connecticut library. They didn't, apparently I don't know if the Meriden, Connecticut library doesn't say anywhere on the library that it's in Connecticut, but they thought they were talking to the Kansas librarian when they made an appointment. So the Connecticut librarians are like, where are our Boy Scouts? And the Meriden, Kansas librarian was, what am I supposed to do with these people? I didn't make plans. She had something she could pull out of the closet. She managed it beautifully, but put the state that you're in on your website, because it's amazing how many, there's an Effingham, Illinois that gets confused with Effingham, Kansas. It's just, there's all kinds of stuff. Okay, so CLOW is the Kansas Libraries on the Web hosting service. Back when it started, well before I got here 8 or 9 years ago, it was pretty much your only option for free website hosting. There are other options now. So not all systems use CLOW, but it is available if you want to use it. It does support custom domain names, and it comes with technical support if your regional system is using it. So for those of you in SECLS and CKLS and NECLS, you're good to go. The rest of you might want to talk to your regional system about what options you have for a website. Oh, I forgot. We were going to talk about planning too. I mentioned the technology plan earlier in policies. This is, however, I swear, the last topic. Okay, so in planning, what you need to do is develop and maintain a technology plan. Have a computer and hardware replacement plan. We're going to talk again very, very briefly about that disaster recovery plan. And one of the things you'll do is look at, is look at the Moodle plan site for sample plans. So Lesson 3, it contains a lot of information on technological planning. One of the things that, in NECLS at least, I don't know what other systems require, but when people do technology planning in NECLS, the 3 things that I really want to see are a replacement plan for your current computers that lists what you have now and how you plan on replacing them over the course of the next 3 years. Some goals and a budget. An idea of how you're going to pay for all that. Those are kind of the 3 things that I want to see in a technology plan. So, and the most important thing I think is the inventory, where you're listing out everything you own that is a computer, server, laptops, all that good stuff. And then alongside that, date when it should be replaced. Those are terribly important. And I talked a lot about the disaster recovery plan a few minutes ago. So again, there are samples. dplan.org is a really useful website for just plugging in information and printing out a disaster recovery plan. There's a link to it from Moodle there. And that's the way to go if you're looking to create one of those and don't know where to start. So to finish things up, your next steps, kind of glance through lessons 1 through 3. A lot of what is in those lessons we have talked about today, so you shouldn't be a whole lot of new information in there. Download and fill out your PC troubleshooting cheat sheet that I mentioned at the beginning of all this. This is for you. You do not have to turn it in to me or your system representative. This is for you to file, put in somewhere where you can reach it easily and quickly. There are a couple of supplemental reading stuff that people have asked in the past. You do not have to read those, but if you're interested in understanding more about your ILS and various other things, those are some extra readings that you can do just for your own edification. Forum discussions, there are 2. One is the ILS buddy system. Find someone who uses your ILS, and just so you know in the future. And then a security forum. I talked about that URL that I put out that I'm asking you to explain why it's not something you would ever want to click on. For your assignments for this month, there are 3 assignments. You need to do 1. So that seems to be a stumbling block for a lot of folks. You see the 3 assignments, and a lot of people are like, I have to do all 3. You do 1, whichever one makes sense for your library. So the first assignment is a Learn One, Teach One, and that's where you will learn how to use one of your either state provided, so Mango, or one of the databases, the Gale Academic Search Premier. Learn something and then teach someone, either a staff member or your or a patron, and then come and talk about what it is you learned and how you helped either the staff or the patron with this resource. For those of you in NECLS, it can, Hoopla and Flipster count. If you've got other system provided information or resources from other systems, those count as well. Or there are 2 website assignments. One is to come up with a schedule for updating your website. If, however, you've got one of our static websites, you don't update it so often, you might want to look at the other one that where we talk about looking at 3 websites from libraries outside of Kansas, maybe, and discussing what you like and don't like and what features you would like to have on your website. Maybe things that you think would be useful for your patrons. So there are 3 assignments. You do 1. Pick the one that speaks to you. Do it. The assignments are due July 6th. With the exception of one person who's going to be in Scotland and Ireland for the next couple of weeks. but I'll give him an extension. I don't even think she's here today. Did I hit record? I did, didn't I? Yeah, okay. This is the time to think about it, isn't it? 5 minutes before the end of the lesson. Okay, so she will, she and whoever else has missed it will be able to look at the archive, you all as well. Sammy asks if you're hosting a tech tip workshop on Cloud Library and RV Digital at the end of the month, does that count? Yes, I will take that. Just write up a little paragraph about what you talked about and who was in the audience. If you had patrons or your staff or whatever it is whoever you're teaching, just kind of explain what happened and how it went. That would count completely. I do not want this to be busy work that you do just because you need to do homework. I want this to be useful for you. So,
hey, Robin,
mm-hmm.
Can I jump in with a suggestion too?
Sure.
Here at NECLS, we have been encouraging our directors over the past year to share little tidbits at their board meetings. So that would be an excellent chance for the Learn One, Teach One also to share some of these platforms with your trustees so that they understand, oh, hey, I see that we paid this bill. You know, we contribute to the NECLS provided, resources, or we help provide resources through the state. What is that exactly? It gives them a chance to understand where maybe some of your budget is going, or even if none of your budget goes there, what is available just because you are a member of the regional library system and affiliated with the state library. So I'd really encourage you to consider them as an audience also. And, it can be just a 5 or 10 minute demo of one of the services this month and then something else next month. You wouldn't have to do it forever or anything, but that's a good place to find an audience too.
That's an excellent point, Anna. Thank you. I had not thought of that, so thank you. All right, any other questions?
I just wanted to make sure to clarify on one point. So the forum discussions are just for their own use. So it's not necessarily part of the assignment. The assignment is to do one of those final 3 options.
The forum discussions are there for you all to make use of and to interact with as you please. I won't count it against you. I also won't count it towards your assignment.
But I say something, that's not necessarily going to be the case for the whole year.
Right.
And that's why I brought it up. I just wanted, later in the year, we will have some forums that are actually, you will need to participate for your credit. So.
Right. But not this year is, or this month, I actually have assignments other than forums. Kim is absolutely right, though. In later months, you will have assignments that are just responding to forum discussions. So, okay. Let's see anything else. Oh, all righty. Juniper mentions that one of the board members thought the Flipster bill, which we ask our libraries to subscribe to a magazine or two to up our Flipster subscriptions, had to do with new cell phone service. So having the pro tips during meetings would be really helpful. And I just actually answered a question just before this workshop from a librarian who was having trouble explaining how Hoopla worked to her board and wanted kind of a canned, this is how subscription or how Hoopla functions financially. So yeah, that's always a good, it's good that when your board understands what's going on and where the money is going. And Anna clarified there, the Flipster is an online magazine subscription service that NECLS and its libraries offer. So yeah, that makes sense to the NECLS folks, hopefully. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording because I think we're about done.